Welcome to the Middle Tech Podcast, this region's leading business podcast shining a light on technology, entrepreneurship, and the future of business in Kentucky and beyond. Our goal is to advance the ecosystem by bringing attention to the founders, changemakers, innovators, and those supporting them. Middle Tech's content can be found on your favorite podcast streaming app, social channels, and YouTube. We encourage you to follow and participate in the conversation. Let's discuss and build the future. Welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Evan Knowles and Logan Jones here. This was an exciting episode that we've been waiting for a while to record. We sat down with WIFL, so Women, Innovators, Founders, and Leaders. It was a conversation with Laura Halligan and Meredith Moore. So there is an obvious and increasing need for more conversation around diversity, especially in the technology and entrepreneurship space. And we sat down and had that conversation. So women and minorities are underrepresented, and there's a lot of reasons why that is. But we need to have more conversations about how to fix it and what the actual problems are behind the scenes that are leading to this misrepresentation of minorities and women. So the conversation around diversity is important because in order to have a successful business and have innovation, you've got to have diversity. You've got to have all walks of life. You got to have all backgrounds and all perspectives in order to build a product that is, innovative and it tackles issues from different angles. And so you've got to have those people in place to build healthy, innovative cultures. And so we had a conversation about, a lot of the topics that I just mentioned. But Logan, why don't you walk through kind of the exact things we talked about?
Yeah. So throughout our conversation, we discussed things like, what is WIFL, as the acronym is kind of pronounced, and what their mission is. We talk about what diversity actually looks like. So, sometimes you hear the word diversity and you have a bunch of different preconceived notions about what diversity could actually be, but there's a lot of different definitions, and it kind of depends on who you're talking to and in what context. So we dive into the different parts of diversity and how you can foster that within your own organization or within your company. We talked about why women are underrepresented in technology and entrepreneurship spaces. I think that's something that we at Middle Tech have seen as we try to go out and get a representative sample of the founders within this startup community. We really have to go out and search for those, the women founders and leaders that are within this community. So I think this was a good start. Even though we have had some good women founders on this podcast, we want to have more. And I think this was a good place to start that conversation and talk a little bit about how we can go about doing that. We also talked about how we can improve over time. So not only Middle Tech and how the guests we have on, but the startup community as a whole. And we talked about what Kentucky as an entire state needs to do going forward to encourage more of this diversity. And, I'll be honest, it's one of those topics that as a straight white male, it's a little bit uncomfortable to talk about just because it's kind of something that I haven't had to face regularly, like women and like minorities have had to face. So trying to educate myself and put myself in those uncomfortable positions is something that I put a lot of value on. So this conversation was really rewarding for me to kind of not really get called out because I definitely see the value in diversity, but to hear those different perspectives and just engage in that kind of back and forth conversation, I find a lot of value in that. So this was a really good interview. Just personally for me, I really enjoyed the conversation with Laura and Meredith. We hope you guys get a lot of value out of this as well. But before we dive into this, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors here. So as always, we've got Land Betterment. We're super grateful for their sponsorship. And as you guys know, Land Betterment is providing sustainable business solutions by taking abandoned strip mines and putting sustainable businesses in their place. So you guys can learn more about them on episode 97, or you can visit them at landbetterment.com.
Yep. Next sponsor is Johnson Law Group. So Brandon Johnson is a great lawyer and attorney that I suggest reaching out to if you have any kind of needs related to starting your company, as far as incorporation documents go, as far as restricted stock agreements go, whatever it might be that you need an attorney for, I suggest you reach out to Brandon. He's from Kentucky. He went to college in Kentucky, and he loves helping Kentucky-based businesses. He has with numerous Kentucky-based businesses, from Louisville Slugger to WeatherCheck to Instagram influencers. So if you or somebody you know need some help on the legal side of things, definitely suggest reaching out to him. Go to middletech.com/Johnson Law Group.
middletechpod.com/Johnson-Law.
All right, we're sitting here in Awesome Inc. studio with WIFL, Women Innovators, Founders, and Leaders. I almost messed that up. Almost. We're sitting here with Laura Halligan and Meredith Moore. So Laura is the Executive Director at Launch Blue and New Venture Manager at the Office of OTC at UK. So that stands for the Office of Technology Commercialization, for those of you that don't know. And she's also the co-founder of WIFL. Meredith is the Director of Operations and Community Partnerships at Base 110 and owner of Cultivated Creature and founder of Shift Lexington and co-founder of WIFL as well. So very busy women here. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Appreciate you taking the time to jump on. Before we get into WIFL or anything related to women in tech and startups, let's talk about your all's backgrounds. So Laura, why don't you talk about where you're from and professional background up until, let's say, today.
All right. So I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee. I moved around a lot, ended up going to high school here in Kentucky, over in Cornerstone Christian Academy over in Shelbyville. I started at Midway University back when it was Midway Women's College. Then I got married and transferred to Troy University, where I graduated with my bachelor's in science, and then ended up moving around quite a lot with my husband's career in the military and wound up serving in different nonprofit roles. And eventually he transitioned out of the military and into Harvard Law and Kennedy School. And at that time I transitioned to MIT, which is how I entered higher education and eventually began my journey in entrepreneurship and innovation. And so at the time I was at MIT, was also at Harvard Extension School, studying finance for my master's degree and working at the MIT Innovation Initiative. So that's kind of my professional background and a quick and dirty background for me.
MIT is kind of a place that people always that have never been kind of just hear, and there's like an aura about it. So real quickly, tell us what it's like to be around MIT and what the energy was like.
So I started at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research, and I think working there and just kind of getting involved in the ecosystem at MIT, everyone has entrepreneurship kind of in the background of their mind. So when I was at the McGovern Institute, Feng Zhang, who's one of one of those creators known for inventing CRISPR technology and applying it to humans, is one of the innovators and one of the faculty researchers there at the McGovern Institute at MIT. And so watching him and seeing that process just as a fly on the wall was a fascinating experience. And then during that time, I was recruited to come over to the MIT Innovation Initiative, which was just being formed, which sits under the Office of the Provost at MIT, and having the opportunity to help stand up that initiative in my role there was really exciting. And it's, the culture of innovation entrepreneurship is just underlying throughout the whole university. And so it was a fascinating experience and a great introduction into this entire world of entrepreneurship and innovation.
Yeah, I'm sure that the technology and the research that goes on at a place like MIT, I'm sure that it's just in the air there.
It is.
All the discovery and excitement that comes along with that as well.
Right. And so one of, and I guess we can get into this later, but one of the first things that we did at the MIT Innovation Initiative was mapping the MIT ecosystem, because no one had a full understanding of how that ecosystem was really developed and all of the many different resources that were available and the programming that was available. And so one of the things that we set out to do in my first 6 months was map and document and create a resource guide for that ecosystem and just internal to the university. And we found over 82 different programs, departments, labs, centers, and student groups focused in innovation and entrepreneurship. And so we met with all of them in that first year and really tried to understand how students, especially startups, moved through that ecosystem and got involved in entrepreneurship and innovation. And so that was like my trial by fire, and it was a great experience.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm sure we could have a full conversation about MIT and all the cool things going on there, but let's dive into Meredith's background here. So fill us in on your background and your professional career up to this point.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Alabama. My undergrad, I went to SCAD, so the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. So my background's really in design. undergrad in graphic design. Thought I was going to be this really big shot designer, and everybody would worship the designs that I make. Turns out I enjoy design, but that's not my strongest quality. Ended up moving to Kentucky for a job. I got a gig at Lexmark as an in-house designer, so that moved me up to Kentucky over 10 years ago now, believe it or not. While I was there, I got to touch a lot of different types of design. So just that ecosystem, anything from, your web design, software design, app design, the interface, the UI, all that kind of stuff. So great overlap. But it also gave me an idea of, project management, account management, the different teams and that whole ecosystem. So about 3 years into that, I decided to actually go back to school and get my master's to pick up a bit more on the business side of things. While I was at Lexmark, I did start Shift Lexington. So I moved up here. I didn't know anybody. I missed being around a ton of creatives. And I, looked around for a couple months and I was like, I'm just going to make a group.
That's awesome.
And that's where Shift came from. So it's had its ups and its downs throughout the past 10 years, really just based off of my own personal bandwidth. Mm-hmm. But what it comes down to is just being around creative people and having those great, inspiring conversations. And whenever we get together, either for like a more themed or organized event, or if we're just doing like a happy hour, it's just great to just have those conversations. So that's where Shift was born, and it still kind of coexists amongst everything else that I do today. So creative side there, opted to go. I went back to SCAD, but online this time, got my master's, still working at Lexmark, and then decided to kind of finish school and start the freelance world. So took my creative side, did some freelance graphic design, and then started dabbling in like the creative project management world. So working with local agencies, the small agencies, 1, 2, 3 people who would get overloaded. And I had a nice little skill set of both the account side and the creative side. So I could kind of pick up both sides, and I did that for a couple years, dabbled in some agency work on the project management side. And then, by luck, met, I've known Randall for years, but Tim Guthrie with Base 110, and he came to one of my Shift events, and he's like, you have just the right skill set that we've been looking for. Let's have a conversation. So brought me into Base 110, and I was like, yes, this is kind of the perfect blend of what I love. I didn't know I had the entrepreneurial side, but through everything that kind of became obvious. Still get to do the creative side because I'm doing all of our brands and marketing at Base 110. And then we're kind of just crafting stuff as we go. So it's kind of the perfect blend of all the things that keep me motivated and excited. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's been fun.
And just to give a quick plug to Base 110, that's another awesome co-working space here in Lexington. You guys have just opened a new part of it, right?
Yeah, we're expanding. So Base 249 is our newest 100% co-working space right here on Main Street. We're neighbors one way or another here to Awesome Inc. So it's great because we can collaborate and walk down the street and make some great stuff happen. But yes, we finally got it. COVID made things a little tricky last year. We added a new floor. We're like, yeah, let's open up a new space. And then we're like, let's wait a sec. So now we're picking it back up, and we're very hopeful with this next year that people will be eager to get out in some capacity and work together.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, let's start getting into WIFL here. So, the reason we wanted to have you guys on in the first place, because of your backgrounds and everything else, and how involved you are in the community, is because if you go through our guest list, you're going to see a lot of guys' names. And it's something we've noticed. It's something our guests have noticed. There's not as much diversity in the tech space as I think all of us would like there to be. So let's take that kind of theme and tell us a little bit about the origin story of how WIFL got started, and we'll take it from there.
Gosh. Well, so Laura and I both started our roles around the same time. Yeah. You joined OTC and I joined Base 110. So like September, October, 2019?
Yeah. So I started in August 2019, and then you were just like
Yep.
a couple, 6 weeks after.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and so we met through Startup Breakfast.
Yeah.
And so, we got introduced, and we were finding our ways through our new jobs, and we ended up just having I think we were a match made in heaven, and have become partners in crime across a lot of things. But we clicked early, but we bonded over these conversations. We go to these business events, these leadership events, and we look around, and we're maybe one of 2, 3, 4 women in the audience, not speaking on a panel or, right. So it's pretty obvious once you kind of get into that. And, we commiserated a little, and we did some research to see, well, what resources are there available in Central Kentucky that really focus on women in business and leadership. And there's a couple little organizations, but nothing quite felt like what we were searching for.
Yeah.
And gosh, I don't even remember. I think we were just like, we're going to start something. What are we going to call it?
We met at Harvey's bar for a drink.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Because I think it was right before, it was a couple months, we had just had a Global Entrepreneurship Week planning meeting. And we had linked up to think about how we could have an event for women. And we were surprised at how few events are really focused on women in entrepreneurship. And I was like, we should start something. And so we did. That first week in GEW, we held our first networking event for Global Entrepreneurship Week, and we did our first WIFL event, and it's been going ever since.
Yeah. And so we started, it was originally, Women Innovators and Founders of Lexington. So we were starting local. And over the past, year and some change, we realized, especially with, and we can talk about that later, but the COVID and moving to Zoom, the reach is much bigger, and so we took advantage. But WIFL stuck. It was kind of one of those funny, we were trying to brainstorm good names. Naming's like the hardest thing too.
Hardest thing.
I'm sure you guys
hard.
know. So we brainstormed, we did some research, we asked people, and this was descriptive enough and broad enough, I think, that it captured what we were looking for. But it might have been Eric or somebody who actually coined the term WIFL. Yeah. And it's just kind of stuck. And now it's part of our whole personality. And, we call folks who attend WIFLites, so there's fun to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we kicked it off, Global Entrepreneurship Week 2019. We started very casual. So just providing a space, low entry point, really, low pressure. You don't have to feel like you have to be on. You have to be super dressed up and professional or being on your A game. Just come and find a community of women in business or in leadership or just like you, to just start to find something really approachable and to start to make a little dent in that gap that we were noticing. We had a really good turnout. I forget exactly how many. Yeah, okay. It was nice. And the feedback that we got, we had such good, really powerful conversations. And it was just really apparent that people have been wanting a place to be able to talk about some of this stuff, whether it's, and we had everything across the board. So women who were in management positions at corporations,
women who are freelancers,
yes.
Women who are in tech, women who are innovators in the research at university. We had we wanted a broad audience. That's why we try to keep the name broad, is we didn't want it to be exclusive. And WIFL has continued that, but we continue to have a broad audience of people from different backgrounds in business.
Sounds a lot like the origin story of Middle Tech, where it's you recognize the gap. The gap that we noticed was just lack of media attention, lack of conversation in the media. You guys notice a gap the same way. So how can people participate in this? You mentioned that you guys are doing Zoom meetings. What does it look like when you guys get together? You guys doing programming? Talk about that.
Yeah. So originally the fourth Thursday of every month is kind of our set time at 4 p.m. Originally we were meeting in person and doing a happy hour, and we intentionally wanted it to be a space for women. So we were a little specific of, sorry guys, you can't join us for this hour or two. But then COVID happened and we pivoted to Zoom like everybody else. But it gave us an opportunity to start to spotlight the women that have been joining our community. And so we would reach out to someone and ask, hey, can we have a conversation with you? Can we spotlight you? It can either be teaching something or talking about your professional journey, or a lot of them just defaulted to an interview. We'd send out a list of, some high level questions or stuff that we've noticed about them that we think would be valuable, and then just have a really simple conversation and then kind of open it up to the group. So this year, I think we're really excited because we've noticed there's value in having the really casual hangouts. There's value in being able to spotlight and have these conversations with the community. So we're eventually going to pivot to a nice hybrid of the two. But then kind of a third avenue kind of came about when we realized we also need to have it be inclusive to open up the conversation to the entire entrepreneur community. So having men join the conversation and folks who are really, because we've gotten some really great questions and people wanting to be I recognize these things, but I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to broach the subject, or what do I do next, or can I come? And, so we wanted to have that space for our women but then also broaden it to the community. So actually March is our first all-inclusive, all-gendered event.
Let's kind of walk through diversity and this whole topic, but let's start with like the foundation. So in my eyes, the best place to start as a foundation is just what's the state of Kentucky right now as far as, you know, women that are in founder roles or leadership roles. Do you guys have any kind of figures or any kind of way to paint the picture of, you guys did earlier, you know, you said you went to events and you guys would be maybe one of, 10 women or something like that. But
That's a generous number.
one of maybe 20,
Yeah.
30.
We would come to start at breakfast and it would be me and Meredith and maybe Tanya Phillips from my office. We'd show up to start our breakfast and I'm like, I think that was exactly our conversation was we wanted to replicate that feeling, but for women. And also meet the unique needs of women who have different working hours, who have families and businesses and also need to be mindful of that. But as far as like specific tracking of metrics, that's something we don't have. It's something we should have, but we haven't. If there is someone tracking that metric, we don't have access to it. What I do have access to is there's a group called Pioneering Women who's done kind of research into this area. And in general, 11% of current companies in Kentucky are founded by women. But that doesn't distinguish between tech entrepreneurship and business, and neither does WIFL. So for us, that's a decent metrics because we don't distinguish between tech entrepreneurship and general entrepreneurship and small business and others. So 11% is the data that we do have, and that's from like 2018.
Right. And just to clarify, the data collected, it's the general we, like whether it's, Lexington, the state of Kentucky, national averages. I mean, it's that's overall there's not a ton of data to be found on those types of specifics.
So in Kentucky, like let's try to figure out whose responsibility would that be if that were to happen and somebody were to get that survey data. Like, would that be the Lexington Commerce for, let's say, if we're just doing Lexington, or is that the state government? Because I think that's data that should be transparent. So whose job should that be, in your opinion?
Well, that's again.
Maybe that puts you on the spot.
No. I guess my thought is, as innovation hubs, I guess we need to define what we're gonna measure. Are we gonna measure all entrepreneurship or tech entrepreneurship or probably both? And then who are the best people who have access to that information? So I think you would look at your government and other organizations, the wonderful SBDC here locally, maybe CED, maybe with partnering with people like WIFL who are working in this area. But also just if you are doing an impact survey, if you're doing any type of metric, ask people to identify how much of your portfolio are female or are women. And other minorities as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really important issue because and it's important to have the data, because without the data, you really don't know the underlying problem, and you don't know how to address it. You don't know what the underlying inputs are to produce the output of the low numbers. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's got to be figured out. But personally, I've been in cultures and I've been in situations, whether it's within a business or within some other organization, where there is a problem of diversity, and you want to kind of solve that, obviously, because with diversity comes a lot of different opinions, and it can create, if you don't have diversity, it can create situations where there's a bro culture or something like that. Because that's one thing that the startup space has been known for, is companies that are founded and wait way too long to have diversity, and at that point, sometimes it's too late. So I think it's a good point that we need to make, that the data's got to be transparent, so that somebody founding a company knows that, listen, like, here's why you need to have diversity, and here's the underlying problem. So I think that's something we need to challenge the community with and doing. And Middle Tech, even our team, our Middle Tech team, we've had 6. When we were growing the company, we were 6 men. And then we started to realize, like, we've got to fix this, and there were ways that we were seeing that we needed to fix it. One way, it's kind of slightly embarrassing, but it's just the way that the internet works nowadays. Is like, one way we noticed was we've got like 4 guys on our Instagram account, and you can go to our discovery page, and it's just like all women on the discovery page. So what it does is it'll like suggest, suggested posts and stuff. And that's one way that that's one way you can trigger like, oh man, like there's not any diversity on our team, and look at what our whole team's, looking at our Instagram. It's just, and that was one thing. And then we started to realize, okay, we need to start getting diversity. But when we brought in more opinions, now we've got Jacqueline, we've got Maggie. It's really important. You notice a big difference on the team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it's something that you have to be intentional about. It doesn't just kind of happen by accident. I think that was the reason that it started off that way, because everyone that joined early on had reached out to Middle Tech wanting to help. And I think that's one of the things I would like to see focus on. I don't know if I have the solution to it, but how can we encourage women to reach out and want to be involved in technology and in entrepreneurship? I think that's kind of the grand question to me, is how can we let women know that they are welcome and they're wanted, and let them know there are opportunities here.
Them as representation. I mean, and I guess an example would be like if you lived 50 years ago and all you saw were male doctors, you would assume that all doctors are male. And so seeing seeing is that there are women like you doing the things you want to do, and being welcome and being heard in that community is a signal that your dreams are achievable. Your startup dreams are able to be fulfilled and recognized.
Yeah. I would also say, don't expect the women to come to you.
Sure, exactly. That's what we figured out. Yeah.
You need to make
we
an
got to
effort.
we got a team of 6 before we were like, okay, let's. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, most people will reach out and they'll either find people that look and are socially like them.
Right.
I mean, you do it socially, you do it networking when you're hiring new people. It's just your natural. And, that's why where you're seeing such a discrepancy of a lack of women is we're not seeing women invited to these panels and sharing their experience and knowing like, oh gosh, she did that. I can do that too, and we're starting to see that with our new vice president. Women are like, oh yeah, we finally made some traction. We can make it to the White House or do X, Y, and Z, So, I mean, but it takes intentional effort and energy. So it's not necessarily an easy fix like, hey, y'all, we want women. And then women be like, yeah, great, we're coming. I mean, it's more of like, asking and having these kind of conversations and seeing, well, okay, if it's a cultural thing, like what are the things that would make women feel comfortable working with you? Mm-hmm. Or what are the types of things from a hiring perspective that maybe we're only looking from the male perspective that would make this job more attractive to a woman in tech or woman designer or whatever else, those roles that you're looking for. Because I mean, and that's the thing, I mean, everybody has this kind of built-in unconscious bias. So noticing it and starting to be self-aware of like, okay, I'm only seeing it from my perspective. What are the things that I can do to broaden that perspective and see what those things would be that would make somebody want to work with you or whatnot? Yeah,
I think, one of the things I started realizing on social media in general was if you follow all people who just agree with you and you get kind of in this thought bubble, that's a really dangerous place to be. I feel like that's a big problem in social media right now, but it's the same thing in your company culture. If you only have people that look like you, act like you, talk like you, think like you, that's a really dangerous thing, and that's going to lead your company down.
Oh, it's destroyed
a
companies.
Dangerous place.
There's a lot of examples to point to. Uber being one. That's why that CEO was replaced. Yeah. Zenefits. I mean, I just know the software space, but there's plenty of examples, on where it bites you.
Well, and I mean, the research that we've done that really talks about culture is, I mean, when you have multiple perspectives, you don't get to that trouble point or pain point with like, or the tipping point. That's probably a good way to put it. Like, oh no, we're too far, because when you have that balance, like what's the phrase? Like you want to be surrounded by people smarter than you. Yeah. You want to be in a room with people that will offer all of the things that you can't offer. You could be the most brilliant person, but you're not brilliant in all the different areas. So the same thing goes for gender, sexual preference, ethnicity, background. So all of those blended together provide such a powerful think tank, really. And it will only make your company more successful, or your product better, because
your brand would resonate better.
Right. I mean, it's really quite powerful, but it's kind of shocking how hard it is for people to understand the value of that. It's like, oh, but we have to expand and the hiring process is that much longer, or we have to invest this money into this type of branding, or we have to hire all new models and all these kinds of things. I mean, to think of just being inclusive and having a diverse representation for whatever your product or industry is. But ultimately, I mean, the numbers show that it really does pay off.
Yeah, I think it starts at culture is kind of what I'm getting from the conversation here. And this is kind of an open-ended, broad question, but what can startups and these companies do to kind of create more of a culture that can welcome in women without, because I feel like you have to take those first steps. So before you get those women in your culture, what are some things you can do to be kind of conscious of that and get, start down the road of diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think one thing that we can do early on is, when we think about how entrepreneurs are represented in popular culture, we think of Elon Musk, we think of Jeff Bezos, we think of Mark Zuckerberg. They're all straight white males, for us in education, and then also, highlighting, as you guys are trying to do, highlighting and finding female founders and minorities in startup to say, hey, there are people just like you doing exactly what you want to do. This is a place for you. Is really important. Going back to that message of representation, and just keep telling those stories until it becomes a normal where people are like, yes, this is a job. This is a job for me. There are people like me in the startup space being entrepreneurs. And so I think it starts early. It starts messaging, and I think it grows on itself. I think that's definitely a first step in that direction.
Yeah, and to that point, it sounds like you're almost describing, you said it needs to happen earlier. What can the education systems do differently? Is there anything? Is that part of the problem? Is the curriculum at all? Is there anything wrong with that?
I think what we're seeing in trends in education based on my time at MIT and then my time teaching recently at UK is that they are starting to encourage entrepreneurship education as part of the business school, and that is open to everybody. Yeah. But as a professor, when you're teaching, bring in female founders, highlight case studies that have female founders, try to include that equally so that the women in your class think that is normal. And I mean, it should be normal, but until it is, we need to push those stories and make that representation clear and obvious.
Yeah. Something an event that recently happened that I thought was really badass was Bumble's founder taking that company public and having a baby like on her hip while she's doing that. What does an event like that do in the eyes of women that are in this same space? I mean, talk about how that kind of speaks to you and what that means to you as a woman that's in this space to see someone kicking ass like that and building a company up and then taking it public like that.
To me, it says, wow, I need to up my game. But on the other hand, it says, finally.
Yeah. Agreed.
Finally. Also, that she is a working mother, running a startup and having the support, hopefully, of her family and spouse in doing that. I also think it's something that we've noticed, and it's one reason we've designed WIFL. And it starts at 4 p.m. In the hopes that women can attend virtually. Being mindful of their other responsibilities that they carry at home, as well as the professional responsibilities that they carry. So, but yes, seeing those stories is great, but also making sure that other young women see those stories. And that they're highlighted, not just because she's a woman, but because she's a successful entrepreneur.
Well, and I mean, the fact that we're seeing that and she's becoming a role model to women, that you can have a family and it's not a flaw. I mean, that's a very old-fashioned way of thinking of like, oh no, like she's not going to be able to do her job right because she's got to go home at 5 and pick up her kids and do that and cook dinner. And like, we need to nix all of that kind of thinking and realize that. And honestly, I'll say COVID's actually probably humbled a lot of people because we've all seen everybody's chaos at home when you're on a Zoom meeting, right? We're all having to be like
2-year-old running through the background, whether you're a father or a mother.
But honestly, I love it because it's hopefully going to fix our overall work culture, realizing, yeah, we're all human. We all have other things. This hustle culture doesn't have to kill you. You can have a healthy work-life balance and still be a badass. And you can still achieve things and take out your company public and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, one of the biggest wins, I think, recently, and that just makes me feel like super excited was, and I think it started really happening in January, was with our calls, we had 3 new moms, all with their kids, either nursing or wrangling or whatever. We had a couple women like in the car going from their job to something else, and then the rest joining from home, and the fact that they felt comfortable to show up however, in whatever capacity that they can, was like a humongous win. Like, okay, we're making, because I've never seen that. I've never attended a professional women's event to where you could bring your child, or that you could talk about that challenge, or, like when you, especially, we have like a ton of women who their husbands are also entrepreneurs and their approach to things, and just the balance of all that stuff. So it was just so exciting to see that. And the fact that we do intros and let everybody kind of do like who they are and what they do. And somebody, it might have been Liz from Awesome Inc. that pointed it out, but like, it's not just I'm so-and-so and I do this. It's I'm so-and-so and I do this and this and this and this. Like, it's this whole nice current resume of like all the things, and you can brag and you can self-promote a little bit and not feel weird about it, and also have a kid in your arms. And, so like creating a space like that to me was our first, I think we've had some wins and we tried to do WIFL wins. So I'm like, we got to celebrate these things. But to me, that was a really big milestone for us to see 3 mamas, brand new mamas too.
Not only on the call, but shout out to Lee Goatley, who's a coach with the Kentucky Small Business Development Center. She was presenting on the call with her newborn in her arms and just rocking the entire presentation, sharing other resources for other female entrepreneurs while, holding her newborn son. And it was just like, yes, this is exactly what we want to see.
I think the media did a pretty good job of like highlighting that. I felt like I saw.
Yeah, it seems like things are trending in the right way.
Absolutely. I think it has, it's definitely been for a while, because I feel like recently, within the last maybe 5 years, a lot of companies have been giving almost like year leave for maternity and paternity leave. I think that was something that was eye-opening and, opened my eyes to, a lot of companies, like you mentioned it earlier, it's almost like a fault that, women are having kids and being punished almost. And so giving them a year to both the man and the woman, I think was something I've been noticing, that companies are really starting to be more conscious of these kind of things, and the media is painting a better picture.
But I think it's important to note that those are in professional careers. But, there are other careers and that don't offer that opportunity. And entrepreneurs in one, like taking a year off your startup, or if you work an hourly job, some of the more service industries may not offer you that opportunity. But I'm glad to see it is a trend starting in the United States, but I hope that continues to grow throughout the workforce, regardless of status.
For a job that's an hourly rate kind of job, whose responsibility, like how can we fix that part of it? Is that something that the government needs to be mandating, to where you get a certain amount of, I'm not sure what the exact word I'm looking for, some sort of credit back for having a child and not being able to work your job? Like how can we fix that? Because that does seem like a problem that is a difficult one to tackle.
I think before it gets to government mandate, I think we as a society need to decide that families are important for both men and women, and look at some other programs from other countries that are out there and decide what works best for the United States. But as a culture, we need to decide that families are important, and they're important to both parents, and that both parents are expected to participate. And again, in COVID, you've seen fathers step up and they're homeschooling from home, just like moms are, and they're balancing and trading off, like, oh, I'll watch them while you're on your Zoom meeting, and then you watch them while I'm on my Zoom meeting. And having to, co-parenting during this time has really highlighted how things have changed over the last, 20 years. But as a culture, we need to decide what our priorities are. And that will drive public policy, in my mind. That's the best transition. Yeah.
And I do want to touch on something, and I want to navigate this best way I can, because this is a tough question. As a founder, you should know diversity is important, but as a founder, you have to balance, you're starting your company and with the diversity, because when you start your company, and you guys can totally push back, but when you start your company, in my opinion, you should start on talent diversity. You should start on, let's build a company and get it going and build a successful company. Is there a point that comes when it's too late to have diversity? Like, talk about, is there a supply problem? Because one thing that I see in the entrepreneurship community is you want to, again, start the company and get as much talent in there as possible. And a lot of time the talent, like we were talking about earlier, there is not that diversity necessarily in the tech talent. or you have to go look for it. So I want to talk about, how should a founder think about diversity as early as possible?
When I guess my perspective would be, when you're reviewing your candidates, are you throwing a wide enough net? And why wouldn't a difference of perspective be important as early on as possible? Especially if you're, as we've talked about, when you're creating a brand and you're selling to the wider market. What is it? 52% of the population are women. So considering their unique perspective, why wouldn't you prioritize that kind of perspective on your team? And if you're finding that you are mindful and you want to make sure that you're hiring people who have different perspective and have the skills that you do not have or have the strengths that you are weak in, then and you're not getting the kind of talent that you want or the kind of diversity in applicants that you want, where do you go and how can you rephrase things to make sure that you are?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at is like if there's not the diversity applying, at some point you've got to throw away resumes because you're not getting diversity, right? You're like, that's kind of what I'm getting at is how do you, as a founder, navigate that, right? Because you want diversity as a founder, right? But maybe they're not applying, and how do you,
Yeah, so one is your network. Are you just looking in your direct network, and why are you not expanding that? So putting the effort to expand your search to be more inclusive. By default, certain networks are not diverse. It goes back to everything that we've said before. You're around people that you relate to, and that's an easy first step. I think a lot of times when you're wanting to hire, you wanting to have some move quickly, right? You want to make progress and you want to find the right people. But I think the focus of finding the right people with diversity or different, perspectives and those things are part of that piece. So it is worth the extra effort and the time and the broader net and all of those kinds of things. Also, something we found is language is huge. So by default, most people will probably phrase things within your direct perspective. And we've noticed that there is a huge difference in how things are phrased if they're directed towards men versus women. Mm-hmm. Especially we did a ton of research on the VC world. Questions that are asked are slanted in very different ways. So I would even say how are you building your job description? What language are you using? What types of culture and benefits and types of things are you including in your job that might be more attractive to women or women with families or families in general, or you know what I mean? Yeah. So, and I think that's a really hard one that a lot of people don't think of. So, it could just be having, a woman read the job description and say, does this resonate with you? Yeah. Or, what it would be even better is finding a mentor that is the woman and have those hard conversations with her and ask her, would this be an attractive job for you? You're in tech. Tell me what the red flags are here. Because those are things that I'm sure she'd be like, ooh, this makes me think of X, Y, and Z. And so it's the work. It's going to be work, but shifting that perspective. And we all have that bias, unconscious bias. We all do it, men, women, everything. But, having that self-awareness and then these baby steps of trying to check yourself a little bit, being like, okay, this is how I interpret this. Can you give me your perspective? And then seeing, if certain job boards or whatnot are, with algorithms and all these other things, are you getting sorted because of you have on LinkedIn, you have 6 male employees and maybe one of their algorithms likes to show your job description to men versus women. Those things are constantly changing. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of these tiny little details, but I think tiny shifts in those types of things, I think could be really powerful.
Yeah. And to add on to that, actively take control of it. Post to women in tech job boards.
Yeah.
Talk to recruiters and ask them, hey, I specifically am looking for diverse perspectives and I would like some minority representation on my team to make my team stronger. Reach out to female colleagues in that space and say, hey, I'm hiring. Don't be afraid to approach someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, I know you got a great gig over here. We're building our startup. Is this something that you'd be interested in coming over as a co-founder, as a founding teammate? Mm-hmm. Be active, pursue talent the same way you would with another male colleague and be like, you're the best. And I want you on my team because I think you can make me strong. You can make this company strong.
like that. Yeah.
I think the common thread there is it's not going to come naturally. You can't just expect women to come and be like, okay, I'm here. I want to help you build your company. It's going to take work. And I think you have to realize that, but you have to understand it's going to pay off in the long run to have those diverse perspectives. If you're serious about starting a company that you want to be successful, you need to be very mindful of that. You need to understand it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort, maybe some uncomfortableness to go out and have those conversations and be told, hey, you're doing this the wrong way. And I think that's something that founders need to be aware of. But something that we've kind of discussed here that I think we would like to start changing is there's not enough women that are kind of being uplifted to be an example for other women in the community. And you mentioned a couple names throughout this podcast, Liz Brown Evans being one of them, who is a great friend of mine. I actually really look up to Liz because of she kicks ass, honestly. She's awesome. So it doesn't have to be within tech. I know this is a tech podcast, but name some women, give some shout outs to women in the community who are doing some really cool things.
Gosh, so for one, I want to give a big shout out to SOAR. And they launched their co-starters. They had 23 female founders in Eastern Kentucky kick off this year. I mean, how amazing is that? Yep. And, we have, and quite a few of them have been joining us with their babies onto WIFL. And so we get to hear those stories and meet some of those women. But I mean, to me, that's powerful to have, because I mean, if you think of just the breakdown of Kentucky and the resources, right? I mean, SOAR has been a great facilitator in that region, but to have 23 female founders, that's actually a really big number. I mean, I know it sounds probably light, but to me, that's a huge win. And then, we've got, we work a lot with the Small Business Development Center. They provide a lot of great resources. We've been talking about ones, either women focused or minority focused businesses. They do a lot of free coaching. And so one of the things that, I mean, when I started my business, I didn't know where to go, where to find these, how to set up your LLC, where to file certain things and whatnot. And a lot of people I don't think know that there's the free resources that are available. And ours is the Bluegrass, but there's quite a few throughout the nation of resources.
I mean, in Launch Blue right now across our cohorts, 35% of our companies are female founded or co-founded. That's awesome. So, we have people like Kate Van Pelt with SnapTech. We have, she is awesome. And her team is awesome. We have Dr. Carrie Schaefer, who's the lead in Memetico. We have Vashon Mosby, who is a great WIFLite, but also founder of VonTech, amongst other of her businesses. Oh, yeah. That's only just one of like 3 businesses that she's founded. Her this morning. Yeah, she's out there and doing great things. And then we have Kelly Wright with Fresh Eye Solutions, who just was on Five. Both Vashon and Kelly were both on Five Across last week. Yeah. And of course, we had 3 of the 5 people pitching Five Across last week were female founded companies and as well. Yep. So I think it's not that they're not out there. It's you have to go where they are and tell them that they're welcome in the space that you've created. Mm-hmm. I mean, the numbers that we've been talking about. And now I'm not saying that entrepreneurship in general doesn't have a problem. I mean, we've talked about, if you go to womenvc.com, they have a great study they just completed about women not only represented in venture capitalists, but also represented as far as investment. And Crunchbase just did a report that came out, and only 2.3% of VC funding globally goes to women-led startups.
Wow, that's crazy.
2.3%. You think of how many billions of dollars are invested globally in entrepreneurship every year, and only 2.3% go to women.
Yeah, and the year before was the highest. It was an all-time high of 2.8.
Yeah, 2019, 2.8, all-time high for women globally. So if you were a young woman entering entrepreneurship space, you already feel at a disadvantage in being funded. We were very lucky to attend a Techstars virtual event recently where there were 2 women, I forgot her name, Dr. Dana Kane and Dr. Laura Howe, who had done a recent study back in published in 2019, I think, in October. They had actually done a study at a recent event where they were seeing how investors were questioning the different founders, and the questions that were posed to male founders as opposed to female founders were different. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that set them at disadvantage. But female founders were asked questions that were loss averse. They were risk prevention questions. Like, I think a couple of examples they gave is, how are you going to prevent loss of customers from your platform, where men were asked, how are you going to gain new customers, is an example that they gave. So men were asked about the potential gains that they were going to realize, and women were asked how they were going to protect and how are they going to be risk adverse. So even in the investor community right off, is think mindfully about the questions that you pose to founders, also the pitches that you review, and think, am I being more critical of this person and more risk averse with this person because it's a female founder? And also representation on your fund manager board. Do you have female representation? Female VCs are 2 times more likely to invest in female-founded companies than male VCs are. So having that representation and opportunity is important.
Well, and I think there's also a very low percentage of how many female VCs there are represented. I think it's like 12% or something like that.
Of all VCs.
Yeah. So like back to representation. I mean, it's if you're having that change or that diversity in perspective and how you're phrasing questions, I mean, and the language too. I mean, so you're seeing the trend of women are getting kind of set up for failure in some sense because of the way someone's phrasing the question to them. And it takes a significant amount of training to be able to catch if you're getting a prevention versus a promotion type language, and then have the skill to be able to, let's flip this question and answer it like it was a promotion question. I mean, it's just, and all of these women founded businesses that are making it up to this point have already had a very, steep uphill climb. You've heard of, needing to be a unicorn. We're having to prove ourselves above and beyond that we're worth investing in. And the skills and the talent that we're bringing to the table is exponentially, higher than your average of our male counterparts.
Yeah, and we can send you the links to these studies so that people can go and research for themselves and kind of understand what the data is and what they can do. But I think our advice, and based on the advice of Dr. Kans and Dr. Huang, I would say is, if a female entrepreneur is faced in an investor meeting and they're faced with a prevention question, to actually answer to the growth part of that question, because people who are answer to the growth and the possibility question are actually much more likely to be funded. But it's, how would you know that if you weren't given that information? And as a woman, if you look at the statistics and you think, oh, I'm much more less likely to get funding than anyone else, wouldn't that be somewhat check you when you thought about starting a tech startup?
Yeah, sure. Definitely deterrent. Yeah. And also, I mean, I think as you become conscious of these things, actually, I mean, making a note and saying like, hey, maybe we should rephrase this question, or looking at your list of, when you're mentoring or coaching and, like seeing the difference between if you're having a female founded company and a male founded company, how different are those questions that you're drafting that you would ask them? Is there a difference? And like I said, a lot of this is probably very unconscious, and it's just something that it's the way you're taught and the way that things have kind of happened. But this is really the way that we need to start noticing it. Very mindful. Yeah.
And I mean, shout out to Keith McMunn, who's the director of the Awesome Inc. Fellowship. He sits on our selection committee for Launch Blue, and during our interviews for selection committee to the program, he has messaged me before and been like, just keep track and make sure that we are not asking different questions from our female founders than we are male. And of course, our selection committee has been great, and they haven't, and our numbers show that. But this is that he was mindful of that, right. And he understood that the data supports that happens. So here in Lexington, I'm glad that we have people who are in the ecosystem who are aware and who are actively trying to be mindful.
Yeah.
And change that.
Yeah, that's the key there is awareness, because I was not aware of the VC questions or any of that. That's really interesting. And I'm glad somebody did the data. Somebody needs to do the data here in Kentucky. Right. Another challenge. I'm going to bring it up again. We got to know the data.
Well, I mean, it's also, like we said, like that different perspective is valuable. I mean, in that same report from Women VC, they report that funds that have female partners, have a 1.5% increase in fund return each year, and have 9.7% more profitable exits. So, I mean, again, we'll give you the links to this data, and people can go read that information for themselves. But I mean, I know how you want the metrics, because, it's like you can argue with a lot of things in experiential. If you bring your experience as the only reference point, but data doesn't lie.
Data doesn't lie.
Through it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we started getting to it there, but we want to kind of transition into this Lexington and Kentucky startup ecosystem. Let's talk a little bit about what we're doing right now, because you mentioned right there, Keith being mindful of it, being aware. Let's dive into some other things this ecosystem is doing well with the theme of diversity.
I think, like I said, continuing to create an atmosphere where women are seen and heard. And so that other women who are looking into this and saying, hey, is this a job perspective for me? Or is this the right time to start my startup? And they see other women doing it and they're being highlighted and they're seen at 5 Across and they're seen like Elizabeth Rosenthal, who is a judge at 5 Across. They see that representation. And they're like, okay, yeah. And it's not just female representation. Obviously, we want all minorities represented, but seeing that is important because it makes you feel like you belong. Just from my own experience, sitting in class on Harvard campus and looking around in my finance classes, you can probably guess what the metrics were. And even raising your hand to ask a question in an environment where you are very much the minority can be daunting. It can feel like even if no one is bullying you or aggressively shutting you down, it can feel like you don't necessarily belong. So just continuing to see that representation and include that is really important.
Yeah, and I would say, having those people be in more public places. So asking folks to be on panels, having that breakdown. This last 5 Across was great. Having both men and women judges. Same with all the breakdown of the teams. Also I would say supporting, even if you are not physically going to be attending a WIFL event, if we're having one of our women-only versions, sharing it, tell people. And there's quite a few other women-based organizations in town too, which we can definitely share as well. But promoting that within your network, because one, it will help broaden the attendance and awareness of it all, but then it's going to be helping you because you're going to be broadening your network, showing hey, we here support women in business. That will help Middle Tuck grow and hire some other badass women. And you know what I mean? So it's kind of this a good snowball effect of if you're supporting the ecosystem that is dedicating its time and effort into these efforts, then they win, you win, and then it just broadens and makes the Lexington startup community stronger.
Yeah. And shout out to Who Got the Money. They've added the Female Founded Startup of the Year award, which is supported by Marrow, which is a local branding agency, and Adam Brown, who runs that. Who Got the Money, which is run by Comlex, Commerce Lexington, Economic Development. They run that event every year, and we are proud to assist and partner on that event, and they founded that new award genre in partnership with Marrow. And so just, again, highlighting female-founded startups. This last year, it was Sarah Alessi from Flywire, who is a great CTO and woman in tech and leader in tech. So, shout out to her and to Flywire, who's doing great things. But there are a lot of other female-founded startups out there. You just have to actually make them feel like this is a space for them.
Yeah. I think an organization that's doing a great job right now that's been mentioned multiple times is Awesome Inc. Yeah. I worked at Awesome Inc. right after college for about a year, and that's where I met some of the most influential women in my life. I want to give shout outs to them. Emily Worley, Liz Brown, who we already brought up, Amanda Murray. All of them, Maggie Bessett, all of those women kind of showed me this is, I don't know, it's almost embarrassing for me to say that I didn't understand that inherently before, but reinforced working with women. It provides a different perspective. It's just totally necessary. But let's now move on to what we should be doing better in the community as far as diversity goes.
I think we've touched on it, is also making sure that if you have a panel or you're recruiting for an event, that you make sure that you have female representation in a public-facing part of that event, not just women, but other minorities as well, of course. And I think another thing would be, if you find an event that is open to all genders, that is focused on female entrepreneurship or focused on issues for female founders, don't avoid it. Go to it. Read the studies, share the information, ask what can I do in a situation to make room at the table or make space or be aware of the challenges that they face and add value in situations where I can highlight them or make sure that they're being heard. So I think those are things that you can actively do right now from wherever you are, whether you're a startup founder or an ecosystem player. Those are easy things to give your time to in order to see improvement in this area.
Yeah. Where do you see WIFL going? So let's talk about the future. What does this look like?
We're going to take over the world.
Yeah.
So our plan for the 2021 is, we're expanding our programming. We've really enjoyed the digital virtual aspect of it. And I think there's a lot of value that can be ongoing once we can even gather in person again. Providing some more, just easy access. We've talked about doing some like Facebook Lives where Laura and I either have a conversation about a topic that's come up, or we invite a guest in and have, just something so anybody can attend and just pick up that content. We'll continue being able to offer kind of our monthly spotlight events, as well as our happy hours when we can do that again. But then bringing in those kind of all-inclusive, all-access types events. So, our next one's going to be about co-founders, so male, female co-founders, and we're going to be talking through their experiences and having real-life stories. And, the conversations you guys had with Jacob and Sarah, we're having them join us and, to talk about the stuff that Jacob learned just by being in the room sitting next to Sarah in these business meetings was extremely eye-opening. And so I think having these real-life stories, that's what's going to resonate with people. Until you experience it or hear it from somebody you trust, that's what's really going to kind of sit with you. So we have that, and then we'll be planning some, especially on the investment side. So we'll be focusing on like the VC side, what it would be like to get a business loan, just the different types of the process, but also the challenges that are being faced for women-owned businesses. So we'll have a sprinkling of lots of different types of content. We're going to be growing our our website footprint and all of that kind of stuff. Right now, we're just primarily on social media. But it's been great because we've been able to get outside of just the Lexington bubble, and we've been able to collaborate with the Kentucky Innovation Network as a whole, which is really powerful. And it's so great, even from, you're doing Northern Kentucky to Louisville and Eastern Kentucky and all that kind of stuff. So broadening our reach, but really also partnering with people who are also doing just.
Awesome. Well, Laura, Meredith, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with us. We're excited to facilitate more conversation like this within our community. But let's go ahead and give more of a plug to WIFL. Where can they find you guys? What's the social tags? The web? I know you just said you don't have a website just yet, but talk about how people can get involved in WIFL if they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have a WIFL channel within the Startup Lex Slack channel. So that's a really great way to, if you're already in the Startup Lexington community, we have a channel there. And so that's an easy plug. And then you can find us either as Women Innovators Founders or Women Innovators Founders Leaders on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. So follow us there. We have a mail list. So if you attend an event, we'll keep you in the loop with the newsletter and whatnot as well.